Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It is awesome to be in the new Carey Founded space. We were in the old Capitol Club building as Empro 5 in downtown Raleigh, and just the feeling and the vibe and the energy here is incredible. So thank you, Becca, and thank you, Carey Founded, for letting us host this awesome panel here. All of you have come because I'm assuming that you are listening to the budget holders, or you are the budget holders yourself, and you're sitting and you're trying to convince your stakeholders, your board of directors, to make an investment in something. And today that investment is going to be technology. So we've brought together a group of panelists that are going to discuss with us, what do you do when you've got these tech initiatives that you're trying to pitch, that you're trying to get the buy-in from the decision makers? How do you go about doing that? How do you plan for the future? And what does the future of tech look like? So I'm going to say thank you to our three panelists that have joined us today. First up, we've got Christopher Beal. He's a development director at Collaborative Work Environment. Mr. Beal has over 10 years of experience in the technology consulting and data analytics industry and brings strong client relationship practices to ensure all initiatives deliver value to our demanding customer base. Mr. Beal aligns each customer's unique needs with CWE and partner technologies to form the best possible solution for each of their customers. He guides customers through the process of identifying gaps in data and functionality to create a cohesive IT application configuration for facilities and business support allocations. Mr. Beal's experience as a technology consultant allows him to identify what systems and functionality needs to be combined with legacy systems to drive visibility into costs, delivery models, and areas for process improvement. Thanks for joining us today, Chris. Next to Chris is Nicole Coughlin, the Chief Information Officer for the town of Cary. She's an award-winning technology executive that promotes the value of partnerships and innovative thinking in government while continuously pursuing new models of civic innovation for collaborative citizen-facing projects. One of the biggest things that is so amazing about being in the town of Cary is their push for becoming one of the leading smart cities, and Nicole's leading that. So, and finally, we've got Fred With from Empro 5, our little British import. He has been sent over from Empro 5 as part of the North American expansion, and he's leading that for us. So he is currently the Vice President of Business Development here at Empro 5. And with his strong technical expertise in data analytics, Fred is committed to enabling businesses with the best comprehensive data-driven decision-making tools. As an experienced business development executive who leads sales conversations with data, Fred is an expert on best practices and digital transformation. Fred's commitment to advancing the industry is evident in his primary objective of expanding Empro 5's footprint in the North American market. His passion for IoT sensors and smart buildings goes beyond his professional life, as he has successfully integrated these innovative technologies into his own home using sensors and automation. So talk to him if you need to set up your house later. He might be looking for a little side gig. So thank you so much. There. Oh, there you go. Yes. Are you ready to host at your apartment?
I've actually stuck in a sensor, so.
Cool, so we're going to kick things off. The first topic that we're going to discuss is how you can align technology investments with the overall business objectives. Fred, I'm going to kick things off with you. In your role with Empro 5, you do a lot of speaking to those decision makers and their budget holders. How can these budget holders ensure that technology investments are going to be directly tied to the organization's overall goals and purposes?
Yeah, I'd say it's a really good question. It starts from the word go, in the sense that you've got to know where you are right now and what you're trying to achieve as a business. So you need to look into your long-term goals as well as the short-term goals that are going to help you get there. And when you're doing that, you need to basically look for a solution that is going to provide a way of getting to that long-term goal. But you can't get there unless you look at each individual point in time, whether that's a 3-month period, a 6-month period, or a year, and say, where do we want to be with this tool by then? So in our Empro 5 world, we have a process management app that gets rid of paperwork. So you might be saying, in 6 months, we want full adoption, and we want to completely remove paperwork. We want to be paperless in 6 months. But it doesn't stop there. If your long-term goal is a more efficient team, then basically you want to start recording data by that year point to say, my team is more efficient, the scheduling's got better, because they have a mobile device in their pocket and they're completing tasks on the go. They're able to do their task on time and get more done in a day than if they were doing paper sheets and everything like that. And in the world of IoT, as we were talking about my home use cases, which is slightly worrying. I've got a door open sensor right here. So this one, basically, you put this on one side of the door and this on the other side of the door. Whenever the door opens, bang, we trigger a workflow in Empro 5 terms. And the reason why I bring that up is because that one door open means nothing. So you could say, oh, we're going to spend loads of money on IoT, but what we say is, what next? What are your goals? What are you trying to achieve with this use case? So with Empro 5, we say, okay, after every 10 door opens, you could trigger a cleaning workflow. Or after every one door open, you could say that that's a security breach. So by tracking what you're doing next and everything that you're doing with that data, you're really proving that return on investment and ultimately helping meet your goals as well.
So Chris, speaking of those returns on investments, this is probably a large portion of what you do when you're speaking to partnerships. How can you discuss the tangible benefits, but also those intangible benefits?
Yep. So a lot of times when we're working with technology deployments, we first try to look at the methodology of what metrics we are going to track and involve the right stakeholders ahead of time. So sort of working into the project planning and management methodologies that we're clear on the financials, the returns, the speed to value, the user adoption, the end user satisfaction, and then making sure that the mechanisms and the tools, a lot of times IT based, to be able to capture those as we're going through the deployment so that you can begin to measure adoption, user satisfaction, the speed to value, and where we're really starting to see the ROI or the financial basis of the technology deployment come true.
So Nicole, Fred mentioned sometimes you have to capture that data for an entire year before you can start seeing results, specifically coming from the government sector. How do you pitch that to people when you're asking to spend their money on things like this?
That's a good question. Well, let's just start by our budget process is wide open. So it's open for the public. So you can come and comment and you can give suggestions and talk about whatever you want to talk about. So you have full access to our budget to help. We also align all of our projects with our 2040 community plan, which was done by the community. So we try to make sure that it aligns. So I think those are like two things that we know off the bat. These are where our technology projects need to align. I think in the public sector it's a little bit interesting because we have internal run a business operations, right? So there's those types of decisions of to the cloud, right? And then there's the service offerings that we use technology. And I think sometimes they've got very different values, right? So when we talk, maybe we talk about what's the return on investment, things that sometimes are more citizen facing have to do with satisfaction, improving quality service of life, and then internally, it might be more hard dollar metrics on decisions of, making sure we've never done anything, moving things to the cloud. So it's a little bit interesting the way that I think that we do it. We try to share as much as we can. We have an open data portal and we try to put as much data out there as possible. I think we evaluate all year long. We look at our technology spend and where it's going in evaluation, but we look at it right in a year. But I don't know that we look at it that same way that you do in terms of each technology slice. It's more holistically and thinking about that in terms of budget and planning.
So I'd love to get both of your opinions on how do you write that business case to compel those stakeholders into saying, yes, this is where I want to spend these huge chunks of money on technology investment.
So most of the time, it's actually not us. Meaning, it's not the IT department; it's the other departments, right? Because they're mostly the ones that ask for technology, whether it's to run the fleets or traffic or public safety, whatever that may be. So we do have an intake form that asks for a business case, asks for the desired outcomes, do they have funding, all of those things. And we take that and score it before we go back and we assign an analyst to then do the requirements for it. So I think it's a little bit interesting that we're sometimes our own customer, and we walk the walk, so we do the same practice for our own team on internal projects and make sure that we're following that same thing, but we push a lot of that. It's back on the departments to actually sell it to us, and then we look across our portfolio of applications and say, hey, we have, I'm just pick on Esri because it's an easy one. So we've got Esri, a great mapping tool. You can use that to develop maps. You don't need to go buy an app. So we're very good about looking at the portfolio projects and platforms that we have, and how do we leverage what we have? Because let's face it, everybody goes to a conference and finds something shiny and new, including myself, and brings it in. But we really have to look at, like, what do we have today that we can already leverage and use, and we do that against the intake form with the business case.
Chris, I'll give you the same question.
Interesting perspective. I'm obviously on the other side, so as a technology consultant, we're coming in and oftentimes trying to help establish those baselines and develop that business case. For us, oftentimes around technology, we try to baseline the financials and the delivery models through the accounts payable data. So it's an interesting data source where you now can get an understanding of what we're spending today, and through the vendors and what you're paying, understand where maybe some inefficiencies are of duplicative technologies or where you may have gaps. So sort of that front approach of using that financial information is going to start to expose where the financial opportunities are, but also then the process improvement and a lot of the contractual optimization that you can go through that starts to lower that. I mean, for us, it's got to be a business case that technically, operationally, and financially justifies itself. And in order to do that, you do have to work with IT as well as your department leads to make sure that it's not just the technical, it's not just the operational, but it's also the financial as well. So those three really come together in a business case that can then be defended by IT, the operations team, and finance. And that sort of collaboration is what makes these large sort of digitization or modernization initiatives successful, is when you do have IT, finance, and that department sort of all rowing in the same direction.
So Fred, I know that as a salesperson, you go through this on a daily basis. How do you bring those teams together knowing that IT is going to be your ultimate buyer?
Yeah, I think it's about getting buy-in from everyone. I think for us, we have a tool that can benefit so many people, but the first battle you're up against is hesitancy, because people have tried the tool before, it hasn't worked. They've got many tools already. Kind of to Nicole's point, you can have a bunch of tools that get bought in and people going, oh, it's shiny, it's new, but then the usage isn't there. So when we come in, we replace a lot of tools where it's been a point solution, and typically it's from a previous administration where they were trying to apply a band-aid to a much bigger problem. And so for us, it's about getting buy-in from each department to say, this is where it benefits your department. So at the director level, you're talking about all of the data and the insights and the actions that you can take off of that data as well. But right down to people that are on the ground, whether that's emptying a trash can or cleaning a bathroom, basically showing them that it will make their job easier and make their life easier as well. And very quickly you form that community of people that are bought into the tool that they've gone with. And ultimately that makes usage go up massively, but also for us, we have a 90% client retention rate because people love that tool and they want to keep on building on it as well. And that environment is the most powerful when people are going, okay, our tool is basically helping us do X, Y, and Z. What if it could do another 10 different things? What if we could grow it? What if we could make it even more useful for my department, for your department, for the whole business? And that level of innovation is really powerful for helping it grow and prove value in every department.
So let's talk about the scariest decision maker in the room sometimes when you're making these decisions, the finance department. How do you prove to them that even though you've gotten everybody's buy-in, this is a smart decision?
It does come down to ROI, but ROI is in many people's worlds a buzzword. People will say, oh, you'll see ROI. Okay. And so it's all about explaining how they're going to see that ROI. And you can basically calculate that for them based on the metrics that you have. That's why I said from the start it's important to know where you're at today. Do you have no tool, or do you have something that can give you a baseline of your efficiency, how many staff you have, what they're using, how much paper you're using, things like that in our world. For other tools it will be different, but ultimately then you can do a very quick mathematical calculation and ultimately prove to them that within 6 months you're actually saving money by having a tool. In our world, I'll use Tesco, largest grocery retailer in the UK, one of our customers as an example. For them, they have false slip and trip claims around their stores, so people will nudge over something from the shelves and then someone will go after them and slip and fall and claim that it was an accident, there was no yellow sign. And Emperor 5 allows them to basically complete a cleaning workflow, take photo evidence, and disprove those claims. And the amount of money that they save from those claims alone pays for their subscription. So right there, you can see the ROI. So for a finance guy, that's when I'm thinking, oh, I can finally prove exactly the ROI that you're going to have.
And Nicole, how about you? You've got to answer to both the finance department and the citizens.
You gotta make them your best friend. No, I'm just
Take
kidding.
them for lunch.
Really nice
I
Christmas
mean,
gift.
I'm just saying. Hey, you know, so it's interesting because I say that kind of jokingly, but sometimes it's not, like, we're not gonna have all that data depending on what we're doing. So there is a little bit of that kind of storytelling to help them think through in the future. Because a lot of times, like, we moved from, when I got there 8-9 years ago, there are lots of siloed applications. And so we have moved to a strategy of a platform approach. You can't just, like, give them an easy return on investment. It's a lot of, like, imagine this, right? We're gonna all move in. So it's being able, I think, to also explain things in a manner that they can then understand for the future. You know, one of the other things is really just a mind shift, working with both the partners, IT, whoever, you know, all the assistant town managers and the departments themselves, is that public sector technology companies are very good at selling to a department, right? So meaning Public Works we're gonna sell you a Public Works work order. We're gonna sell you a customer service work order. And essentially it's all workflow work orders, right? So shifting that mindset and getting people to understand that a work order or a workflow is a workflow is a workflow, and moving towards a platform approach, right? When you start talking that way, you start to get the buy-in of finance, like, okay, well, eventually we're gonna get rid of all of these other systems because we're gonna move them to a platform approach. How long that's gonna take? You know, I'm not really sure. I'm gonna be honest. Like, I'm not gonna say it's gonna be 2 years or 3 years, but it's gonna be a strategy to do that. So I think a lot of it is like walking through where we are, telling them a story, helping them to get the buy-in and understand the vision for the future.
Yep, absolutely. And Fred, you touched upon the idea of the baseline, right? And Nicole, that plays into those
Yeah.
intangibles. Everyone needs a baseline. They know we need to establish our baseline, but how do we do it? How can we even start with that? Chris, where do you swoop in and start painting that picture?
Yeah, baselines for us are always established from the financial data set. So as I mentioned, the accounts payable is a great source of that. That also starts to inform what cost centers or accounts that you need to track as you're implementing technology and you want to see cost decay. So a lot of that measurement validation protocols can actually be identified up front of time while you're baselining those, and then that obviously goes into the business case, which allows you to partner with finance and say, hey, here are the 3 or 5 different cost centers that we hope to impact, and you know, give us a feed once a month, and let's start to report the cost decay that we see from X initiative.
Yeah, I think just to come back to Nicole's point, I think that's a really good point, because we can talk numbers as much as we want sometimes, but for a finance director, sometimes it's like, imagine you didn't have to worry about this. You know, it is that point of just imagine a world where. I think that has a lot of power as well, because then it speaks to the day-to-day of what they're actually doing.
Do you think it's more important to focus on the long-term or the short-term benefits when painting that picture? I'll put it out there for all 3.
It's got to be a balance.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's got to be a balance. Speed to value is a real thing, right? And that's all short term. If you don't have your long term defined, then your short term is going to be all for nothing.
Yeah.
So like Nicole is talking about, so many of these large organizations are going to the platform methodology, but then we're talking huge investments into what you're hoping is going to last you then for a very long time. How do you balance that effect with those new and shiny technologies that are popping up all the time? I mean, generative AI, let's look at that. It wasn't even discussed 2 years ago, and now it's the only thing many businesses are focusing on.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll talk about for us, so we have, like you said, it's a big investment in platform, and it's platforms, it's not just gonna be one. But I think the important part for us was to talk more about what the architecture looked like and make sure it was an open architecture. So we have requirements for all of our new solutions about making sure that they have open APIs so that we can ingest data. Because At the end of the day, let's face it, everything that we do ultimately comes down to the data and how are we gonna make decisions and how do we use it. So we wanna make sure that we can invest in solutions that have an open API. So we're not managing 1,000 different dashboards, really 1,000 different applications. We're managing them, through one day. I would love to say single pane of glass, but I don't think that's realistic. But maybe a few panes of glass, right? So I think those are like important decisions that come along with what does your architecture look like. Cloud's a good example too. You can scale up, scale down. So those types of things are going to make you be able to be nimble for the future. And then, let's face it, at some point, some things aren't going to be desirable or needed anymore. We can do rip and replace.
Yeah, so Fred, from a tech company's perspective, do the terms cloud and open API scare you, or is it something that you guys love? It lets you play in the sandbox.
Yeah.
Not for us, but a lot, yes. A lot will reach their limit. A lot of tools, you sort of get really sold on the dream with that tool, and then you get to the point where you're like, oh, this is going to solve all our problems. And it's like, how well do you play with others? And they don't play well with others. We have an open API, but I think the power of our tool really comes from custom integrations as well. So we have custom integrations built with SAP, with Cisco Meraki, with disruptive technologies, but then we have an open API just to push data, like Nicole says, to a dashboard. And that really is a big point for buy-in, because ultimately, if you give people another dashboard, they're just not going to look at it. They're just not. My background's in analytics. I used to spend huge amounts of time on dashboards where you get 6 months down the line and say, how are you liking your dashboard? I haven't looked at it. I also had someone, this is a separate story, but someone who said, our dashboard must be broken. I said, oh, why's that? They said, oh, it's showing we're doing a bad job. Hang on a second. So, but yeah, I think that's the thing, is that a single pane of glass is the dream, and so you have to be adapting. Generative AI, it's everywhere at the moment, and it's growing, and I think it's here to stay, but it's an area where you've got to look, right, how can we augment our tool, how can we improve it with something like that? So you've always got to be prepared to play well with others, I think.
So speaking of that single pane of glass and dashboards, we're looking at 2 screens behind us. Almost every new building that you walk in today is going to have a huge screen somewhere in the lobby. But at what point are you dashboarding for dashboarding's sake? You're not utilizing that data. How do you make sure that doesn't happen when you're looking at tech investments? Chris?
You gotta have some type of monitoring on the application itself, right? How much user activity is running through the tool, how much is that dashboard being used in the decision making? So is it coming up in management meetings or leadership meetings? So I mean, certainly different ways to log the application, but I think just having a good grasp on what do you want to monitor, and does the application or a third-party tool give you that insight?
So in terms of the dashboard, what I think about, because the visualization is great, dashboard with data, it's great. But I think before you even get to the point of building out the visualization, it's what am I going to do with that data? So to build it, to look at it, I mean, okay, that has some value. We can see what's going on, but you really got to figure out, why am I displaying this data? Like, what am I, if it reaches whatever the threshold is for, each visualization on there, it's what are we doing, right? Is it an improvement, or is it, maybe we're celebrating, right? It could be like we're celebrating, we hit whatever the threshold was. So I think it's smart to think about not just what you want to see, but what are you going
How
to
do
do
you
with
drive
that data?
action?
Yeah.
Yep.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's the thing, is that we always say,
It's like we do that.
yeah.
We're really not trying to sound for 5 years.
Nicole
Well, I'll
speaking,
get
I'm
this
going,
through.
yes. No, 100%. We look for action points in data, right? I use an example of a temperature sensor, again, coming back to the sensors, but if it's 72 degrees, what does that mean? Is everything okay? Because you don't want to be staring at a dashboard with a line chart going 72, 73, 72, 73. But the biggest, most effective use case for us is refrigeration monitoring. And why, you might ask, like a refrigerator is a refrigerator, how exciting can it be? But in a medical sense, you've got vials of medication that are worth thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars, that if that refrigerator fails, you've got a massive issue on your hands. So yes, I'm speaking in M5 terms, but that's where we integrate and we trigger a mobile response to one of the teams to go and empty that refrigerator and save the stock, which can save hundreds of thousands of dollars on the spot. So again, as Nicole says, it's about action points and taking action, because if you're not doing that, you're just staring at a screen, and you can almost trip yourself up by doing it, because you're just staring at a screen expecting everything to be fine, when actually things are going wrong, you're just not doing anything about it.
So that brings me to the idea of these contingency plans and risk management. That's a form of technology in itself, but how do you guys pitch these frameworks that incorporate all of these into the tech investment strategies? Chris?
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure that I've thought about that a ton. From a risk perspective, I mean, for us, it's always around process improvement and financials. So I know I keep on hitting that, but that's really the approach that we take, is trying to reduce the risk and the coverage that you may have, looking at contracts and spend and the terms and conditions that sit within those. And as you continue to grow, it's not as big as an issue for, I think, small local government, but large enterprises, is you're constantly acquiring people and you're introducing new contracts and terms and risk with that. So trying to keep sort of this process improvement and optimization team in line about how can we continue to reduce the risk, consolidate contracts, consolidate cost, which then looks at how do you consolidate data and process and technology around the service delivery vendors that you have in place.
I think that plays really well into what you're saying about the platforms and the single pane of glass.
And then we should talk about our friends in security.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Right, because that's a big part of, risk, right, associated with financials and all the things that we do, but making sure that they have a seat at the table up front and they're not just, in the closet in the back somewhere, and making sure that they're really brought in up front. It's going to help with risk, at least assessing. We're not going to, protecting, understanding how much risk, no matter what project, what application, it doesn't even matter. What I think organizationally, you have to figure out what is your risk tolerance, right? And I think that threshold is different on different implementations and different things that you do, but I think you need to be in line with your organization's, risk threshold.
So we've talked about going each individual department. We've talked about now bringing those risk people into the forefront of the conversation. Is it the best idea to sort of get everyone in one big room at one time to sit down and come up with the grand scheme of things?
I mean, in a perfect world, yeah, right? I mean, I think it's like, when we talk about continuous improvement, right? I think we're all continually doing that. I think we try to do the best that we can and bring people in that we can, and it's, if we can get everyone in the same room, it would be awesome.
And when you can, I think it's still being able to work virtually and be efficient in that, but putting the right gate reviews through the process where you can take a second and make sure you get buy-in from all those parties before you move to sort of the next deployment or implementation task. So those gate reviews sort of allow people, pull in different people, get buy-in, make changes, and ultimately launch with a consensus from the team that this is where we're going.
So once you have that consensus from everybody, how should organizations approach evaluating the total cost of the ownership of that technology to ensure the long-term cost efficiency of these projects?
Find a good partner, or partners, because I think, the breadth of technology and the gaps you're gonna have to fill over this year, next year, it's more than what you can do, I think, yourself. So you find good technology partners that do this every day, that understand the ins and outs of what data you do need to look for in baseline, and then what measurement protocols need to be put in place to ultimately track towards that. So to me, it's gotta be about the partnerships.
Fred, a big part of our approach here in North America is through those partnerships. Talk us through that. You're coming from it from the supplier side, whereas Chris is coming from it from a consultancy side.
Yeah, I think we can talk about this together.
We happen to be partners.
So Chris at Collaborative Work Environment is one of our partners, and the great thing about that is we're able to find a company that is in the same space, has the same goals, is innovative, is exciting, and ultimately is trying to drive businesses forward with their data. We're really aligned with what we're trying to achieve. I'm hoping you're nodding at that. But ultimately, that's what allows us to grow together, right? Is we have a solution that we believe we can bring to Chris, and Chris has one view, which you might want to just give a quick indication as to what that is.
Well, and I'll sort of build off your point, is that even technology companies, right, partnering together to go service a potential similar customer is the value that either the enterprise or the local municipality needs to be able to build this, right? Is different perspectives, different data sets, and I think traditionally, because of the proprietary nature of systems, it was, we are competitors here, where we're getting now into this sort of open game. We all need to play together well, and that's really where we need to turn as vendors and figure out how we can help, because we all have complementary technology, right? How do we come together to start to work together and deliver more value to our customers? So, sorry, I went
Yeah,
the route.
yeah, no, I think that's it, is that it used to be very much so that you would not play with anyone and you try and make it on your own, but I don't think that works anymore, especially kind of, we're talking about right now in today's environment. It's really that people are looking for the best solution. They've got all the information available to them about all the tools that are out there. So you really want to give them the best solution to their pain points, whether that involves bringing in some partners to help you along the way. That is probably the most effective approach.
And as the end user sitting here, Nicole, how do you guys approach this? Is it easier when you have this one-stop shop approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think they hit on it. I was thinking to myself, I mean, it's really about building an ecosystem, right? And figuring out what your ecosystem looks like, and what are the strengths that you need, and whether it's a solution or partners or vendors, and what does that work for you? Because, I mean, you said it, but I know from a municipality, we certainly can't do it alone, and we spend a lot of time figuring out who are the right partners for us, and what is like vendors and right tools and right solutions. So I think it is about building an ecosystem that you can grow with.
So as we build and as we grow, it's easy to know what the economic climate looks like today, right here, right now, but you can't build something without that long-term future for it. How can you expect these budget holders, these stakeholders, to have the buy-in both now and 10 years from now when they don't necessarily know what things look like?
I think for us, it was really, it fundamentally comes down to the shift in how you build out your infrastructure. Like it's like the foundation of your house, right? So it's like, what does that look like? And if you can get that right today, you're just building layers on top of it. Previously, you just had a bunch of houses, right? And so you're trying to manage them all, and that's just not sustainable for a whole bunch of reasons, and certainly not for the future with technologies and the changes. So it's making sure you can think about what is the infrastructure, what is your architecture, what does that look like that's gonna keep you in it for the long game, so you can bring in, technology when needed, and you can scale back when you can, and you can manage with the things that you have. But I think it fundamentally comes down to the stuff that, nobody sees, all the stuff under the covers that runs everything. And so it's all about that. It's about your network design, it's about the whole thing, but it's making sure that that is really what you want to make future-proof, or as future-ready as you can, as opposed to the applications that sit on top of it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think to build on what Nicole's saying as well, I caught up with some sales leaders in the UK where we've just switched government, so we've gone to Labour, which is the first Labour government in 11 years from Conservative. And a lot of sales leaders right now are saying everything's slow, nothing's getting through. And I think it's because they haven't done what you're saying, is that the companies haven't built something on the rock to say, right, we're stable and we can grow and we can add new tools to that to build our ecosystem. They've always been point solutions, and they're like, right, now's not the time for another point solution. So I think that's why there's been a lot of sales slowdown in the UK. Something to watch out for with the upcoming election out here as well is whether that will have an impact on tech, tech adoption and tech sales as well.
Especially here in the US, I mean, our government could potentially change every 4 years. So if you're pitching these huge, huge contracts, how do you play within that space? Chris?
To me, you've got to do the right due diligence on that partner ahead of time. One, to make sure that they got the stability to grow with you in the plan that you have in place. Obviously, in the tech space, there's a lot of acquisitions, so trying to understand, is this company going to be around in a year? And if not, who's in line to acquire them, and is that the platform that we're on? Because a lot of times you see that Oracle comes in and buys a tool, or SAP, and then you're caught with maybe an SAP shop, and you have an Oracle tool now. So, I mean, I don't think you can ever get ahead of that. It's all too fast-paced and changing too much. But again, it comes back down to partnering with the right people, the right groups, as local as you could be, and forming that sort sort of long-term partnership plan with, it's not one group, right? It's the ecosystem of people that are gonna be there for you.
Yep, so my last question before we open it up to the floor is gonna be about that future proofing.
Yeah.
Any tips for the audience for how to future proof that tech stack that you've got and what we need to see growing?
Hire smart people.
Hire smart people. There is a part where you kind of got to standardize, and you got to just whatever that standardization looks for you. But you do need to standardize on some sort of platform and decide what that is, and know that the ecosystem that you can live within, and figure out what is going to be the best solution for your organization versus others. But it's really as simple as coming back to figuring out what are those base layers that you can build upon, and to get away from big systems that don't talk to each other, aren't going to have integration points. Actually our team, we don't have a lot of developers. It's more about integrations because of the way we've built our structure. We just don't want a ton of custom code, right? So now it's all about low code, no code, because we don't want to be able to have to manage that. So I think you've got to think about how you're going to manage these things and what the people and the resources it takes, and that it's going to play into how you kind of build the framework.
Chris?
Nothing to add.
Right?
I think, Nicole's nailed it. It's choosing that right space for you to be, the right ecosystem to be a part of, and then committing to that, really. I think, once you can grow within that and add tools to it to basically meet every need, then you're set up well. I think the worst thing that I see, I used to work for a recruitment company that suddenly, after being a Microsoft house, made the switch to Salesforce, and then everything changes. All of your integrations to Microsoft Teams, to Microsoft Lists, Microsoft To Do, all of that broken because you've just made one big pivot, and suddenly you're in complete disarray. So it's about choosing your direction, committing to that direction, and then finding the right providers to help you along the way with that.
Nice, thank you. Well, I'm going to open it up to the floor. I'm sure all of you have a few more questions aside from what I had.
Don't make them too difficult.
No? Yes.
The last part you mentioned was interesting about the macroeconomic factors, like how do you play that part? You mentioned, Freddie gave the example of Tesco, which is a huge company. They have kind of the luxury to store that video data and have that kind of in their back pocket. So convincing finance for them is probably easier in terms of they know long term it's going to be hard to fail. But I was wondering in terms of scale, like for a smaller company, how do you approach it for them where they care more about short-term profits versus, they have to pitch it to some VC firm, why am I using this product, et cetera. I guess how do you approach it where the spectrum of, the spectrum of clients that you have to convince them that you should be using this, like when they care about short-term bills probably a lot more.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think at that level it's much more, I want to say, of a passion for the owner as well. You're typically at that level, you're speaking to the owner that founded it, they've grown that business, so they're very passionate about making sure that their business is more efficient, but also they're nervous about making a spend of X dollars on a tool that they're not sure is going to work. So you've really got to hold their hand through that. But it's kind of like Nicole's point, I guess, is that you've got to show them the journey that they're on and show them what their dream is. But also, for me, being a sales guy, nothing stops there. It's about, once you make that sale, it's about proving that value for them, helping them along the right way. And I'd say for us, with our sort of small to mid-sized customers, we do a very close sort of run through of the first 6 months to a year with that customer to make sure that they're seeing that ROI and checking in with them to show them the value that they're creating as well. But in that initial sense, before that sale happens, it's really about looking into the data that they have available to them today and saying, right, here's the improvements we can subtly make, and ultimately just pushing them along the path of, you want to be a Walmart, right now you're not. This is the path that you can do to be on the same. We can provide a tool that allows you to have the same tool that they're using, it's just under a different brand. So let's get you started with that and grow that innovation that way.
I'll add to that. I think from a smaller organization that maybe not as big as Tesco or some of your large enterprises where like the financial benefit's not as great, is you can then start to look at, well, what's the productivity gain that we get with our teams, the efficiencies that ultimately are going to convert into revenue growth. right? So if you are small and you are growing, the savings necessarily aren't the important thing. It's how is this technology or tool or initiative going to get us to that goal of growth, a lot of times tied to the revenue generation, which obviously productivity and efficiency, process automation all plays a good part of that.
Yeah, and that's right. Any savings at that level have almost twice the effect, really.
Yeah,
Because it's
flip it on the revenue
Yeah.
head, there's usually even a lot more there. So
Yeah.
it's priorities of the group, right? Big enterprise is always gonna go after savings, and especially when they're public organizations, because they've gotta drive that way. Smaller private organizations, completely different goals and objectives, but you can still align those initiatives to true value, and I think measured towards it.
So you kind of started to touch on what some organizations consider soft savings, or, and we run into this a lot in the business that I'm a part of, well, that's great if we have efficiency, but if we're 20% efficient, unless we fire 20% of the people, we don't get hard dollar savings. So I was curious, how do you work through those things that are deemed soft dollar ROI and make the case when maybe it's not real?
A lot of times we try to pair those with, financial impacts. So it is maybe switching up and adding some service with technology where the service drives a lot of the financial value and the technology brings some of those soft, intangible things to measure. But from a finance perspective, if you can implement that technology alongside the savings of another service project, right, they sort of come together and you now can get sort of both worlds out of one single initiative. But the soft savings are hard, right? And especially if you're working through finance, they don't care about that, right? So it's like either you got to get out of the finance department, or you've got to find a way to marry the two together.
Yeah, I'd say in our world as well, it might be slightly different to the industry that you work in, but we work with a lot of facilities management companies that are basically outsourced companies that come in and they perform like a janitorial clean, for example. And for them, that efficiency basically sets them apart from their competitors, so they win new contracts. And for us, that's not something we see. We say, okay, we're going to become 40% more efficient, but they know with the photo evidence, with completing the task quicker, by providing that high quality of service, that's going to lead to new contract wins for them. So they know in their terms, and that's something we're even coming in blind to, and they're basically very eager to get started with the tool on that basis.
Anything else? Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for your insights today. And thank all of you for coming to hear our panel discussion.